Here we are. We're recording. We don't have like a presentation today. It's just a general discussion, like the name says, Dev Roundtable. And we're just going to be talking about Tailwind CSS, uh, some view component stuff maybe. We've talked a little bit in Slack, and it's been, I'm not going to say contentious, but we have different opinions. Um, so that's it. That's all I got to start. I think we all know about Tailwind and CSS. We all heard. Who knows what CSS means? How do we start this?
California style sheets.
Yes,
Yeah,
California
yeah.
style sheets. Um, I've been doing some Tailwind stuff. I actually have the Tailwind CSS website open right now, and I just really like this quote from the creator, who of course is gonna, talk up his own product. But I like that if you can suppress the urge to retch long enough to give it a chance, I really think you'll wonder how you ever worked with CSS any other way. And maybe that's true, but maybe that's also covering his bases. It's all like, if you hate it, you haven't tried long enough to become part of the cult or whatever. I don't know.
How do you really feel?
I just,
You haven't been brainwashed yet.
yeah, it just seems weird. So I've been doing some stuff with CSS with Tailwind, and I just, every time I see Tailwind and it has, like, I get a lot of his arguments. I really like a lot of the stuff where you want to do little small building blocks, right? And you can build stuff up and you can try all sorts of things. But all of that to me feels like something you do like in when developing or during, like in Web Inspector, so you don't have to remember. You can just do the classes instead of going into the actual style sheet and being like, I don't know, text align, whatever. You just remember to put class text center or whatever. And then I feel like once you get the right look, then you should make something else that applies those styles. Especially like if it's in a loop or something, because it looks to me just ridiculous if you have HTML that's like, let's say you're building a list of items and everything is like li class equals and then like 12 things after it, right? um that just seems weird to me, and I don't know if I'll ever be, go deep enough into the Tailwind arguments to do that. Maybe I'm just lacking in understanding. um how does anybody else feel about this?
I'm with you. I like Tailwind in a lot of ways. I do really like it for rapid prototyping. In an ideal world, I do then stop and pull that out to CSS classes, which I think Tailwind explicitly recommends against. They're like, no, don't make a CSS file with classes and use apply everywhere. I do exactly that. I think it's a great pattern. I think it's convenient. I I love CSS. I think CSS is a delight. I, for getting spicy, I consider it a programming language. I saw a wonderful talk at Strange Loop where someone implemented FizzBuzz in CSS, and it was just truly a joy. I should find that. It was just
I was
truly a
going to
joy.
ask, like,
Oh, it's so good.
can you FizzBuzz in it? Maybe
You
that's the
can.
test.
The person who gave the talk had failed a programming interview and then got so angry about it that they did it. And I was like, oh, truly a spectacular talk. I hope I'm remembering that correctly. I'll try and find it. But I love CSS. I love Tailwind. I don't find I I find it interesting that Tailwind is so anti-CSS because I actually consider it a relatively thin wrapper. Like class flexes, flex call is flex column. Um, you don't have to write literal CSS, but you're just writing CSS. You're using a class. And then I like to go make CSS classes with it. I don't find it particularly mind blowing. If someone was like, you can't use any more Tailwind, go write CSS, I'd be like, all right. I find converting between the two very easy. I own that I'm also very comfortable with CSS, right? Not everyone is, and that's super legit. Uh, so yeah, there are a lot of things like I find it convenient and easy to use. I do like the whole Tailwind config thing. That's very convenient for theming, in my opinion. Um, but I do object pretty strongly to their whole deeply anti-CSS thing.
Max, do you know why? What is their given justification for saying don't use apply or like don't write your own classes? Because I've seen that too, but I don't remember what do they why do they say they don't like that?
That I don't know. I think it's because you're supposed like they want you to be using Tailwind so you can be doing it with like utility classes and change things quickly, I believe is my understanding. Um, sure. You I, I mean that's not wrong, but you could also just go change it in another file, right? And if I have, it's for me, it seems like a little bit of a foregone conclusion. Like when I'm writing code, if I'm writing the same thing a million times, I could go copy and paste that in four different files. I could also make a function. And I view CSS very much the same way. Um,
Yeah, I one of the things the I think good arguments there is 'cause, okay, all these things are separate, right? Like CSS, the Tailwind, or the idea of utility classes, the Tailwind implementation, and then there's like view components, whether it's, I guess, the Rails idea of a like a certain frameworks deal, or I think Casey, you gave a talk about like view component in and of itself, just like frameworkless. And I think a lot of them gel together, and a lot of the arguments gel together. And one of the things is like if you have a view component, you can sort of and use Tailwind, you can have it all in one place. It's like here's the logic for this. Um, here's the logic for this. Here's the HTML. Here's the everything. And then also the CSS is right there. Like you don't have to bounce around in multiple files to figure it out. But I do think you can like bounce around in the same file. Like you don't you don't necessarily have to like have everything in line. You can call functions and methods or whatever in that file. And then you could also, instead of doing all the utility stuff directly in the HTML, you can be like, here's a semantic class for this. Um, I do agree sometimes the naming stuff can be annoying, but whatever, just semantic class. And then like I don't know what really supports this really well, but like in an ideal world, I would say do that, and then later in the same component or earlier, wherever, have your own bit of like, this is this component CSS, right? Because we have like all these frameworks have like asset pipelines and all these things where like you don't necessarily have to uh yourself like create one application JS or application CSS or something. You can split it in all these files. And the same thing about the images and all this, and it'll slurp it up into one that's really easy on the network calls and everything. And so like, why can't we also do that, with getting it from this place instead?
Isn't that the approach that CSS and JS advocates have been pushing for? To use like React components and then inject the CSS directly into that component.
Possibly.
And then use tooling to extract, all the classes out into something that'll compose well.
Yeah. I did see something, I think I pasted it in the channel where it was like some sort of pre-processor or some part that you put in your pipeline, and it lets you create like write the CSS, write the Tailwind with all the utility classes however you want, and then it processes all that, and basically every time it sees a class with a bunch of Tailwind stuff, it first of all normalizes it, so it basically like splits it on space and like orders it alphabetically, so you don't have to worry about that sort of thing, and then it like hashes it and then like creates for every hash that's there, it creates like the apply something, so that you can write it how you want, and then you can still push out to people like small CSS bundles and small HTML, right? That's another thing where it seems like, I don't know, either Tailwind advocates like hand wave that away, or they explicitly say it's not a problem. They're like, you should have the smallest CSS bundle possible. And the way you do that is with a lot of HTML, just a lot of HTML. And I'm like, but wait a sec. What, why do like X bytes of CSS matter more than the same number of bytes of C, or even more HTML? Like what's this about?
I think their argument there, and I'm not saying I necessarily agree, but I believe the argument there is that HTML will get loaded first, whereas then the CSS gets fetched. So technically, if all those bytes are in the HTML, it's something critical path. I know you're all convinced now.
I mean,
So
you are really good at convincing speech, Max. I will say that.
I know. So thank you. Like, it's my specialty. Hire me for all your persuasive talks.
Yeah, there definitely is a bloat with having all of the utility classes repeated, you know, like ad nauseum in the HTML as well, versus just having, you know, maybe like simpler targeting mechanisms in like a single sheet or something. So I mean, that is a big thing I saw recently.
Yeah, I think you pasted this Tailwind as an anti-pattern deal, and that's one of the things that they show there is like the idea. And I always bring up something like this because it's the easiest thing to think about, which would bloat a lot of it. Is there's like a list which has certain classes on it, and then every LI has like a certain number of classes that are repeated over and over. And like one of the things you can do is just do like a semantic class for the UL and the LI and repeat much less. Or you can just do a semantic thing on the UL and the LI has nothing, and you write your CSS where like a UL with this class does this, and a UL with this class and the LIs underneath it do this. But that is apparently not the way. that's not the Tailwind way.
There's even a way to do that in Tailwind, but if you want to write some really gnarly and hard to read
because you can do
Tailwind,
like child whatever. Yeah.
right. And like I have done that a few times, and every single time I go to do that, it's a good 15 minutes of me trying to put square brackets in the right place. And then find, like, I don't know, like it shouldn't even take 20 minutes to go through all the permutations of where square brackets could be, right? Like there's not that many spots. And yet there are, apparently, because I can go through them for 20 minutes. At which point, like, really, I should actually stop much sooner and just do something else. But you know, you do what you do. But yeah, like that's a perfect example of, you know what handles this really nicely and easily? CSS. Like there's a whole way to do that with basic selectors.
Yeah.
And I think Tailwind and selectors is a place where it falls really, really, really short.
I don't want to call anybody out, especially by name, but so far this has basically been the anti-Tailwind brigade, and I'm okay on doing that for like another 3 hours or something. But maybe it's good to get some other perspectives. And I mean, I think all of us who've been speaking can also talk about some of the good parts about Tailwind. But I think there's at least one person on this chat who is like more into Tailwind and is more of a proponent. And if they want to speak up, they can. If not, that's cool.
Are you thinking of me?
Yeah.
Is the Tailwind liker
'Cause,
here in the room with us
there
right
it is.
now?
I think I've been more of a devil's advocate. You know, I didn't,
Oh, okay.
you know, I'm pretty new to Tailwind myself. And when I first, started using it, I had this, maybe similar reaction. Was like, I thought this was the whole idea of cascading style sheets. Like you're supposed to get your style sheet, get rid of your inline style, like just because it clogs everything up. And so I didn't get it. And I don't honestly, like, I still probably don't really fully get it. Like, I think you'd really need a diehard Tailwind, in this round table to be able to really eloquently express the heart of why it is that you do Tailwind. Honestly, what happens for me is I just sort of, I'm a bit of a sheep following the flock, and it became the latest thing. And of course, Kelly was into Tailwind, working with her on Jute, and I mean, it'd be interesting to see like what's the adoption rate these days of Tailwind, and is it going up or down? Is it pretty stable? But it does at a certain point become a certain thing where it becomes just like a common language, and there is a certain advantage to that. Like everyone, you get on a project, and if it's using Tailwind, you know what's going on, versus some kind of custom design system, with all these, I've been on projects where like they're using, these underscores and dashes, and like you sort of have to understand what the hell that's about. And, so it sort of becomes this kind of common language that everyone knows how to use. But then, of course, at some point, people start saying, hey, you know what? This isn't really doing what we thought it would. And then 5 years from now, like everyone will look back and say, God, can you believe we used to use Tailwind? I would be surprised if that happens. Maybe it's already happening. I just aren't in those chat rooms yet, except for this one.
Yeah, I think a lot of that is really interesting. Also, thank you. I didn't realize so much that you were being like devil's advocate and feeling yourself like a sheep following along. But it's good to get a perspective of someone who's at least been publicly arguing more for it. And I do agree a lot. Like even I, who don't know much about Tailwind, like when I see a lot of those classes, I'm like, oh, okay, I know what's going on there. And then you can easily do something where it's like, oh, this is like W-24. Like I know what that means. And if I want to change the width, it's really easy. And then like, PT, whatever, like MB, like all these things are really clear. A lot of the stuff as well, which is like text center as an example. And then like, I don't have to remember whether it's like, like text align or text H align and like whatever the attributes are. And I like that a lot. I think I said when I was talking about it, it's like, look, I get it. Tailwind, you made like the best utility classes ever. Like no one has to do utility classes ever again. Thank you. But I think my argument is more like, where do the utility classes go? And I do get the not wanting to go back and forth between a lot of places. And so maybe, in my dream world of what a view component is, that is really the right way, because you can have, the names and everything in your HTML, and then you scroll down a little bit, or you do a search in the same file, and you see all the familiar things, the MB, the PT, the like SM : whatever, all that stuff. But yeah, also, oh yeah, what you were saying about the, in 5 years or whatever, maybe this is the thing for now. It's interesting to remember like when jQuery was what like everybody used. And it seems like now it's just like, no, you use plain vanilla JavaScript, in part because a lot of things like a lot of things have been put into that, or it's a lot easier to do. You don't need to have all the special weird jQuery only things, or a lot of the polyfills are gone, question mark. Like they're just, you can use vanilla JavaScript a lot more. And there was also like the CoffeeScript craze, right? Where
Mhm.
people are like, let's just do coffee. Why JavaScript? And now it's
Yeah,
like,
coffee
As in
script.
Casey has entered the
yeah,
chat.
like if you use jQuery and CoffeeScript now, it's like you're a, I don't know, you're somewhere between a pariah and just like a way out of touch, you know? So maybe it'll be the same thing as you're saying. Like maybe there'll be a time where people are like, okay, yeah, we're still using Tailwind, but not like that.
I think
Oh, go ahead.
I was about to say like 10 minutes worth of completely unstructured rambles, so you can go first.
Okay. I was gonna say, so like I know I just said a bunch of things I don't like about Tailwind. I also almost always bring Tailwind into a project, and like there are a couple of things I genuinely really like about it. I like how they handle breakpoints. I find breakpoints really confusing. I work with them all the time. Historically, and I guess this ties into other thing. I like their theming a lot. So at my last job, I was staff augmentation with a company, and I worked one-on-one with their designer, and we implemented like an actual full design system, which was a delight and super fun. We did it all with CSS variables, which was really neat because they're super powerful, but whew, a little, you know, would have been nice to just use some programming in there. Would have really been nice. And like I really value that experience because one of the things I always do in a Tailwind config is I have a script that I got from someone on the internet, like one does, that ports all of your config variables to, oh man, I do terrible things with Sass. I still love it. I still do. I won't lie. I think we should just all be anyway. Other hot takes. And it ports all of your variables into CSS variables with like a specific naming schema so that when you're in your CSS and you can't get at for whatever reason, you can use them. But like having done an entire system with just pure CSS, like it can be done. I have done it. I sort of enjoyed it because it was pure Team Hardway. But boy, you know it's really, really great? Robust theming. And I've swapped out themes before, and like the customizability of the system is really nice. Like I have done custom breakpoints before, custom colors too. And I really appreciate the fact that like when I need to do breakpoints, it's like, okay, small, this, medium, this. Like I can do them manually, and I will mess them up manually. Like it's just too confusing for me. The nomenclature and everything. And then what else did I have written in? The other nice thing about Tailwind is editor support is you get, I think with a lot of editors at this point, like you could probably install something and then you get it'll be like, oh hey, did you actually mean this class? And you're like, oh yes, I did mean that class. Thank you. And I know for a lot of editors, if you're in pure HTML, you can get support for that in your CSS files too, if you've got a real swanky one. But like right now I'm working in Elixir, and boy, the editor support is not there. But like I can at least get help for my Tailwind class names. And it'll be like, did you mean fex? I don't think you meant fex call. And I'm like, you're right, I didn't mean fex call. And things like that.
All right, here I go. I think that somebody mentioned rapid prototyping for Tailwind early on in this discussion, and I think that is really where it shines. And I suspect, I cannot prove this, but I suspect that a lot of the developer enthusiasm for Tailwind comes from a place of when you write Tailwind, you are led down a path of a particular methodology of thinking about building out a style system that if you have sort of like a like low to medium level amount of experience with CSS it doesn't feel obvious, because like you start learning about CSS, and like one of the first things you learn is the first letter there, the cascade. The cascade is awesome and incredibly powerful, but I think it is a real it's a real trap. It's a real foot gun, because I mean there's a famous Sandy Metz talk, the wrong abstraction, right? And the whole, I mean, it's a talk about object oriented design, but her whole point is like, you know, we as programmers, we learn about dry, don't repeat yourself, and it infects our thinking, right? Like it's a useful tool in the toolbox, but we over apply the idea, and so we immediately, like, you know, again, sort of like low to medium experience levels get this idea, like we hear about it somewhere, we hear about dry somewhere, and we're like, oh my god, this is programming, now I'm computer programming because I know about dry. And anytime we see any duplication, we're like, crush it down, make that into a single class or a single object or whatever. And what happens is if you get the wrong abstraction too early, then your single abstraction starts to grow all these little warts that become basically like all of the logic of your system in one place, because it has to handle all of these different edge cases that really, that one function should be like 5 different functions that have, like, you know, a little bit of duplication or whatever. And so, you know, the wrong abstraction, the whole Sandy Metz talk is basically like, you know, how to deal with that a little bit better than just reflexively eliminating all duplication that you see right away. Like, just think about it a little bit more. And we fall into that same trap with CSS, I think, a lot of the times when we're just writing it as regular CSS or like Sass or whatever. There's a discipline to it where you duplicate first until things start to settle, until your design system starts to come together, until you start to understand where the component boundaries are, because you don't understand that at first. When you're building a new system, you think like, oh, I need this chat component over here, and it's got a button component in it, and it's got a text input component, and like you try to do the top down thing of like, I know where all of my boundaries are really sharp right away up front. And the reality is you don't. And if you act like you do and write CSS like you do, then you have problems. And the cascade really bites you, because you have all of these like, oh, well, I defined all the typography for my app on day 1. And it turns out that a paragraph inside my chat widget needs different spacing than a paragraph inside my menu widget or whatever. And so now you're fighting the cascade instead of letting it work with you. What Tailwind forces you to do is to flip that. You cannot do top-down cascade design with Tailwind. You have to start at the basement and think about individual pieces of the puzzle. You can't say, I'm making my chat widget. You have to say, here's a p tag. What's going on with this p tag? And I think that a lot of the enthusiasm for Tailwind comes from people who never learned the techniques for being disciplined about their CSS writing. They only ever experienced that, like, you know, medium level of experience level with CSS problem where the cascade bites you because you're trying to do the top down thing and it just doesn't work. And, you know, Tailwind is not the first thing to address this. There are things like, you know, BEM, CSS, BEM. That's another attempt to address the same thing. Other utility style libraries attempt to address the same thing. But what those things all have in common is that they are just disciplines, kind of like, you know, TDD or something like that. It's like, it's a choice that you have to make as a developer to do that. And it's a beginning choice to say, this is sort of our strategy. And then it's a moment to moment choice that you have to keep making again and again and again to say, nope, I'm not jumping up to the top level and defining cascade stuff. I'm staying here in the basement and just defining leaf nodes on my on my tree here. And Tailwind says you can only define leaf nodes. You can't jump up to a higher level on the tree. And I think that is a revelation to a lot of people, because they're like, oh my God, suddenly I'm not emptying this entire magazine into my foot constantly. I'm not allowed to. And that's exciting. That's like a big revelation. It's not an idea original to Tailwind. People have been writing CSS and especially Sass that way for years and years. But it's again, it's one of those things. It's a little bit. I don't want to get too much into this, but it's a little bit like dynamic typing versus static typing stuff. It's like you can write a program in a dynamic typed language successfully and with some discipline, but it invites a lot of foot gun type behavior. Like, people are very successful writing in dynamically typed languages, but if they get seduced by the cool speedy stuff that you can do in Ruby or whatever, they can create a lot of traps for themselves, and that's true in CSS as well. And so I think just like if you've just been writing JavaScript and you've shot yourself in the foot with it a bunch of times, suddenly you're writing TypeScript and you're like, oh, sick, wow, okay, this is solving a lot of problems for me. You could solve those problems in JavaScript. Plenty of people have techniques that they apply to the way that they write JavaScript to solve those same problems. TypeScript is not required, but it can introduce ideas to you, and it can more firmly than just just remember to check for null or whatever. Like, TypeScript can say, no, you gotta, I'm not gonna let you forget to do this. And Tailwind, I think, is kind of the same thing. And so it's the same sort of revelation. And it's not necessary. What I don't like about Tailwind is that, and this, I'm rounding the corner, this is about the end of it. Tailwind doesn't give you a way to eject from that, right? It forces you to think about things only at the leaf nodes. And that's good for starters, for prototyping, for figuring things out, for going from no understanding to understanding, and calcifying and ossifying, and okay, this is the structure of our system now. These are the components, the boundaries are becoming more solid. You don't have a mechanism to go from there are 16 classes on every single HTML element to I've got some really nice Sass that's really defining this system. And crucially, you don't have a way to go, now that this system has been around for a year and we have figured out some of these layers and some of these styles, and here is what the typography looks like in our system. Adding a new component to a system like that's been done thoughtfully and well, is a joy, because you're boom, new thing. It just fits right in there. Awesome. And in a Tailwind system, it's well, I don't have to fight against any cascade, sure, but I need those 16 class names on here as well. So to me, that just feels inelegant in the long term. In the case that you have done your CSS well, and that's a rare enough thing that I understand the enthusiasm for Tailwind, both at the beginning and the later stages of a project, because that's it's a very hard thing to do in the long term. That's all of the thoughts that I have about Tailwind.
I think that's a lie, Casey. I think that's all the thoughts you're willing to do in one chunk right now.
That's all the thoughts that are at the top of my head right now. And if somebody says any other words, it'll probably prompt more thoughts.
Yeah. Yeah, I think a lot of that was I think it's really good. I mean, I love the whole wrong abstraction deal. I've been in places where it's just like horribly wrong, like orthogonally to what it should be, right? Like the worst thing ever. Um, and I totally get the feeling of, wanting to abstract stuff, wanting to pull it out. And also getting into that case of like, well, I'm not gonna actually really change this. I'm gonna modify it slightly and grow warts and everything on it. Um, I do think like this is a part of experience and um I don't know, maturity and discipline to realize like there are times you need to pull back and do something new, even if it's very similar. There are times you need to refactor. There are times you need to, um, or just not do any of that. Just wait a little bit, right? Like I think we've all know about, or we've all experienced like the second system, you know, the syndrome. Like you learn so many lessons from the first time, and like the second one is the real start of the good stuff. And yeah, you just need to like wait a little bit and see. So I basically agree with that whole like in the long term, it's not so helpful because there is a stage that I guess nobody gets to, and possibly the creator, what's his name, Adam something. You need to get him on and talk like we're something real and big. Like we can get the creator of Tailwind CSS to talk with us.
Yeah, I would love to read a blog post or watch a talk that was titled something like Tailwind on a 4-year-old project or
Yeah.
something like that.
And so it seems like what he's actively arguing against, um, but it could be his audience is not like the later on people. It could be the people who are like struggling with CSS who want to get out of the morass um, into something cleaner. But yeah, I definitely feel like there is this time after you've done it for a while, you know what's going on. You don't have wildly different styles and everything. You're building on a good, sensible foundation, and it's like maybe that's the time to extract some stuff and get rid of the repetition or give things better names and just like you know do a little cascading with children under stuff, do a little at apply, and just make it nicer and easier to deal with. But I don't know, it also does presume a lot of like it's sort of like what I was talking about, my dream of the view components where they would have their own CSS and it would be, handled by the pipeline. A lot of this is the dream of like working on projects where everybody can be, disciplined and mature, uh, and or you even have the time to do it, right? There's like the people who don't know to do it yet. There's also the people who do know to do it, but they're like, we got deadlines. I don't have time to do anything else with this and clean up anything because tech debt is hardly ever a priority.
The trick with components with their own CSS is being really careful about the cascade. And like there have been CSS and JS attempts to do that where then they like extremely isolate the CSS, which is fine. So like they scope it really hard as if it were like module scoping. But then if you ever want to reuse that CSS again, you can't because it's extremely scoped. And there are reasonable ways to do it. Like in between. Like I think in a lot of languages you can just import like in a side effect way your styles and it'll just be like, oh, you imported a CSS file. That's neat. Like, cool. I feel good about that. But I just know they've tried to do something like that in a whole variety of ways in JavaScript. And I have tried so many of them, and every single time has created its own nightmare.
It's so funny too. I've just been the app that I'm working on at my new job has a few different ideas about styling in it, just because they didn't have a like UI specialist, and so everybody was just kind of like, oh, I just need to get this in there, so style the components. Oh, I just need to get this in there, so SAS files. So we're going to try to start consolidating on one idea. But I've been doing a little tour of all the various CSS in JS libraries that are out there right now, just to kind of like, I've used a couple of them, but you know, I need to, it's been a little bit, so I need to refresh my memory. And also I know there are a few that I haven't ever researched. And it's so funny to look at all of the websites for these, because they all have the like testimonials section. For some reason, every library needs to have a testimonials section now, as though it's, you know, I don't know, some kind of product they're trying to sell. I mean, I guess
Right,
it
like
is
a blender. I don't know. This changed
Yeah.
my life.
I mean,
Breakfast is easy.
I get it. Like I understand why it's there. It's just kind of funny, but every single one of them has the same testimonial section, and every testimonial is something to the effect of, "Oh my God, I've been waiting for this. It solves all my problems." With and then just like $ some other CSS in JS library, whichever one they had most recently used, I'm sure.
Yep. I will strongly anti-recommend CSS modules.
Oh yeah, yeah. I hadn't looked at those. I was looking at that yesterday, and I
Don't.
was horrified. I was like,
I used it
like
once in a project, and so if you're not familiar with them, what they do is they import your CSS and then you refer to them as like variables, and they like strongly hash the, well, not like strong, they hash the style names and scope them really hard to your file. And at first you're like, this is great. This is great. It's not going to leak. Nothing is going to accidentally use this file. They are hell. I used them once on a project because they were shiny and new, and Jim was like, let's try this. I'm like, I'll try it. I think that is actually the example I go to when like I'm in an interview and people are like, what's a really big mistake you've made on a project? And I'm like, boy, do I have one.
I got the perfect answer.
I'm like, oh, I know. It's just nightmarish to use. And then to go to extract it, it's just terrible.
Yeah, I have a hard time like visualizing, like if I'm just reading the docs for something or like a tutorial, I have a tough time like looking ahead too far if it's brand new stuff to me. I'm like, okay, I actually have to like get my hands dirty and try it to understand all the implications here. I'm not very good at like just imagining it. But with CSS modules, I read like 2 pages of their docs and I was like, no, this is horrifying.
Yeah, I guess that's a good thing if it's so obviously horrifying that you don't have to experience the pain yourself. You're like, I get it now. I know this is not going to work.
I think if I were doing something in JavaScript now, other than like, I don't know, I would probably just use Tailwind. If for some reason I couldn't and I had to use a CSS JIT, like, I don't know, a very contrived situation, I would probably just go do styled components. Or I could like look at what's new. It's been, I don't know, a couple of years since I've looked, so that's like 35 years in JavaScript libraries. They probably don't even use JavaScript anymore. It's probably secretly like WebAssembly COBOL or something.
Don't joke. That might.
Oh, I
might
will.
happen.
Can and I will.
I wonder if, like, for me, I started like using Tailwind seriously at the same time as Vue components on this Rails project, and you know how much of my enjoyment of building out this sort of design system has been really the Vue components, and the Tailwind just sort of went along for the ride. But they do seem to like go well together. I think if we weren't like using components as much as we are, I'd be like hating the Tailwind even, a lot more. So it's good when your sort of technologies complement each other well or work well together. And it's almost like Tailwind encourages using components rather than like abstracting your CSS into CSS classes. Instead, make a component and keep your CSS close to that, and you can just make you can make your variations and have different settings and things at the component level. And then if you have to tweak a style or change a color, you just do it in one place. I mean, that's the real scary part about Tailwind, is if you don't at some point abstract into a component, you could find yourself doing a search and replace for styles all over, where you have to change the width of something everywhere. So at some point you've got to solve that problem in one way or another. I didn't mean to have the last word there.
No, but it
It's
seems
okay
like
if you have the last word, actually. Like, that's fine.
it seems like a natural last word. I was just looking at the
Oh,
Tailwind stuff.
And
Oh,
one
go
other
ahead.
thing, it was fun to be like, I started using Tailwind before the JIT was around. And like, I don't think Tailwind would still be around if they that was like definitely, it's hard to believe it got as much adoption as it did before that existed. So like, if you're just getting into Tailwind, like life before the JIT, was just like,
Is that, because I
absurd.
remember doing a little pairing with you a while ago, and like we're having some trouble and some styles weren't happening. Is that because you
I
had
mean, you
to?
have to understand the JIT. Like you have to get that, it's only going to, it used to be that like Tailwind, especially in development, was just everything. And then you had like, if I understand correctly, like you had some post processor that would strip out all the things that you're actually not using. And then they figured out, oh, we can, and it must be some very clever regex work.
Yeah.
I don't know how it does it.
I don't know if we're using the JIT.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, I don't think I've ever used the JIT.
Well, I mean, I think it's the default by,
Oh,
I
I don't know. I'm gonna go look. We're gonna do some science.
I think it's the default now. It's been a while,
Yeah.
but it like, and you can tell it what files to look in. So yeah, you can't do some clever, nice things like, interpolating color variable, like if you have in your code, some color that is being used for all sorts of things, you have to write out all of the actual Tailwind so it can pick up those
Yeah.
utility classes. Otherwise you'll get bitten. It's like, why is this not red?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, that's what I remember, because it's like I remembered it the other way, or I guess either way it works, whether it just includes the things you're using or excludes everything you're not. But like something, I feel like I was pairing with you on something and it just wasn't working, and it's like, oh, to make the CSS work, we have to restart the server. So it picks up the change, and that it's actually part of this, like the utility class you're using is fine, but it's not defined anywhere because you weren't using it before. And I'm like, cool, but yeah, I mean, I get it, because a big part of the deal is like keeping the CSS bundle small. There's no point in including everything if you like never use certain text colors, or you like never do padding. I don't know if that's a thing that
I'd be
happens.
impressed if you never did padding.
But
well,
what I
it's
mean.
that it has to define, otherwise it has
Yeah.
to define every single,
Yeah.
and there's a lot of defaults. And then you have now, and then they added the arbitrary values, which was super cool, that you could just
Yeah.
create anything you want on the fly in a particular situation. So it's gotten a lot better, or more powerful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I do think you you have a good point of like you started using Tailwind and Vue components at the same time. And I think it's like very, very built in or very sympathetic. I can't do words.
Integrated.
Integrated. Like it just they work together really well. But yeah, I'm interested. I may post in the channel. I'll probably reread some of the Tailwind stuff and like Adam's, whatever post. I'm gonna call it a post. I don't know if it's like a rant or a sales pitch or whatever about
Manifesto.
manifesto, why to use the utility classes and nothing else. The bit about reusing styles and apply. It does say a lot of what we're arguing is like you want to avoid premature abstraction, right? I get it because you don't want to end up with the wrong thing, but like
I would argue that's and I mean this both for the laugh, but also actually very sincerely. I would argue he is prematurely preventing premature abstraction, but like very sincerely.
I love it. And I complained about this on the channel. It's like if your first recommendation is using multiple cursors in your editor, I'm like, I don't know if I can listen to you seriously after this. And then one of the very last things, like the points in avoiding premature abstraction is like, oh, your CSS bundle will be bigger. Oof. And I'm like, again, why is no one talking about the HTML? Why do we hate the HTML? I don't know. But anyway, I don't know if we have more to add. Chris just unmuted his camera. Maybe he's just going to take us all to school at the very end. Or maybe we'll just wrap up and say thanks to everybody, and I'll stop the recording and we'll meet next time. There it is.
Cool.
Like and subscribe or whatever it is people say.
None of us know.
I've just been here popcorn.gif.
Perfect. No notes.
There's the place to stop.